I think really it comes down to expertise. If you're not using a real expert, you're not going to be getting the full value for money. So you really need to make sure you're using the right person.
Hey everyone, Darren here. Today we would like to talk about the role of a surveyor, as some people call them the accountant in the real estate world. The surveyor plays an essential role from buying, selling, managing, developing, renovating, planning, and more. With that being said, a lot of first-time or new real estate investors do not understand what they do and how they can potentially impact your investments. Today we have Tom to give us an overview on this topic. Hope you like the show and have a good day. Cheers. Hey Tom.
Hey Darren, how's it going?
It's good. Thanks for coming in because
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think I met you, last year, close to last year, and there was happy hour drinks with a bunch of people in our industry. And then last month, again, I bumped into you with my friend Gary, and then it's great to talk about, our work. And then it's something that I really want to know as a surveyor, because to give you my background before, I used to work in real estate funds. So the only time that I work with a surveyor is for appraisal. But then obviously for development, for other works, there tend to be more engagement with different surveyors. So this episode is to explore more on that kind of subject. So thanks for coming in. And then I hope this is a blast for all of us.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, for the audience who might not know who you are, and would you mind telling them your background and a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So hey everyone, my name's Tom Parker. I'm a manager in the Valuation and Advisory Services at Colliers in Hong Kong. I've been working in Hong Kong for close to 2 years now. Previously, I was working in the United Kingdom, where I began work in 2011. So I'm a Chartered Surveyor, so that means I'm a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and I'm an RICS registered valuer as well. So most of my work essentially involves carrying out valuation and advisory projects across Asia, so not just limited to Hong Kong. I still also do some work in the United Kingdom as well. So it's a fairly global remit, but essentially the main role I have is helping clients make investment decisions, helping them manage their portfolio effectively, and making sure they're getting the right advice to make these decisions.
I see. Well, so for the audience and myself who are not familiar with surveyors and appraisals, would you mind telling the audience a broad intro of the concept and what they do?
Sure. So essentially, appraisal is a function of a surveyor. So you can have surveyors for various different roles. There's surveyors who appraise arts and antiquities. There's surveyors who will measure land. There's surveyors who will be involved in the construction of projects. They'll look at building defects. They'll estimate building costs, what building materials are required. But most surveyors generally, if you hear the term general practice surveyor, they're typically property surveyors and normally commercial surveyors as well. So one of our roles is appraisal. And then alongside that, we'll also do landlord and tenant work. We'll do agency work as well. So we perform the full function, but appraisal is essentially giving a value for a property or a building at a certain point in time. So that's one of the many roles we can fulfill.
So yeah, obviously something that I'm very live under a rock. So there are a lot of questions I have regarding this subject. So before anything, right, would you mind, because just now you mentioned that there's commercial surveyor, there's a residential surveyor. What other types are there? And then what are the types that a new real estate investors tend to work with?
Okay, so I think the easiest thing to do is to split it into 3 different pathways. So there's property surveyors, there are land surveyors, and then there are art and antiquity surveyors. So the arts and antiquities is quite a small arm. It's a fairly niche part of surveying, and they'll essentially look at fine art, give values for fine art. They'll appraise the additional value for fine art, or for instance, one example could be, I'm from Southwest England. You may have heard of the graffiti artist Banksy. Yeah. Properties that have a Banksy on them, which a few do in Bristol, that can have a major impact on the value of that property. So we've seen vast differences between properties that have the Banksy on and that the one next door that doesn't. So that's one side of things. Then the land surveyors, they will typically, they're the people you'll often see out on the street. They've got the tripods, they've got the cameras, they're looking at distances, they're looking at different heights of land. That's how surveyors originally, that's how we originally came about. So that was our our primary role, hence the term surveyors. It was surveying land. So maps that you see produced, where you see the contour lines, where you see the heights of mountains, that was work originally produced by surveyors. That too is still quite it's become much more of a niche part of surveying. So typically when someone says, I'm a surveyor or I'm a chartered surveyor, they'll be talking about property surveying. And then we can split that into commercial, which is what I do. I generally look at commercial buildings. So that's offices, shops, industrial properties. Could be things like hospitals, schools as well. Then there will be residential surveyors, and then you'll also have rural surveyors as well. You don't see them as often in Hong Kong, fairly common in the UK, and they will look predominantly at farmland. They will work on the sale of large tracts of land. They'll also look at alternative energy projects as well, power stations, that sort of work. And then there's building and quantity surveyors as well. So a building surveyor is someone who you would call if you're looking to buy a building, but you want to know, does this property have any defects? If I buy it today, how much money am I likely to be spending over the next 5 to 10 years on keeping this property up to standards? And then there's quantity surveyors as well, and they generally work with on construction projects, and their job is to say, okay, to complete this project you will need X number of bricks, a certain amount of time. So they'll work alongside the costing of a project to make sure all the materials are delivered on time and that you know exactly how much it's going to cost. But generally the main thing is commercial surveying.
Obviously, in real estate, surveying obviously have a very important role, which I'll go into that in the detail later on. And then I think a lot of people, when they think about surveying, they work really close tie with conveyancing. Would you mind explaining as well on the conveyancing and surveyor's role in the process?
Okay, so conveyancing is essentially buying and selling assets. So a surveyor, you don't need to have a surveyor to work with you to buy or sell land, but I would say it would be highly recommended, and there's a number of reasons why. So if you bring a surveyor in when you're looking to buy or sell a piece of land, in the first instance their role will be purely advisory. So you could say, look, I'm interested in disposing of this property, can you come in and have a look at it? And a surveyor can come in, and the first thing they can do is give you an appraisal of the value of the property. So at that stage you know straight away, okay, my building is worth X million Hong Kong dollars. So you've got a good idea of what you should be able to sell it for in the market. So you can have a fair degree of confidence when you do get an offer as to whether that represents market value or not. Another role for them may be to then work with you to look at whether a disposal is in your best interests at that time. So you may say, okay, we're looking to dispose of this property in the next 6 months, but the surveyor might come on board and say, well, actually, have you considered this? And there could be a multitude of reasons why selling the property at that particular time isn't in their best interests. So the surveyor should be able to work with them to help them come up with a much more thought out and structured disposal program. Then it comes on to the technical side of things. So a lot of the work that we still do is agency based. So we would represent the particular seller to help them find a buyer for the property. And that would involve not just finding the buyer, but also ensuring the terms upon which the sale is agreed are those best suited to the seller and the best terms that they can get. So that helps them know that they'll be getting the advice all the way through the process. Then when it comes on to the actual legal side of the conveyancing, the surveyor will work with their client alongside the solicitors to make sure that the client is getting real estate specific advice. So although most solicitors will have a fair degree of knowledge in real estate, when it comes down to some of the more technical aspects of real estate, it still pays to have a surveyor there in your corner to help you understand what it might mean for you if you agree a certain term, what a certain clause may mean, to make sure you're fully clued up throughout the process. And I think they can add the value that perhaps a solicitor can't do in that instance.
I see. Because it seems like a very technical work. When I listen to it, everything, it seems like it requires a lot of studying, a lot of experience, a lot of insights that a lot of people in the real estate industry, they might not even know. So what do you need to become a surveyor, and what type of license do you need to be one?
Okay, so again, this depends on what sort of surveyor you want to be and which professional body you want to be a member of. So typically the term surveyor sits alongside the term chartered surveyor. So if someone says to you, I'm a chartered surveyor, or if you see the designation MRICS, FRICS after their name, that will mean they're a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. So this was the original professional body. It was founded, I think it was founded in 1868 in the United Kingdom. So it's a fairly old body. They go back quite a long way. So to become a member of the RSCS, first of all, you have to do an RSCS accredited degree. Now, this is something I think a lot of people who are looking to go into real estate don't always realize straight away. So it's something I didn't realize myself. So my undergraduate degree was in geography. So then I was told, well, actually, if you want to become a chartered surveyor and you want to do it as quickly as possible, you need to do an accredited degree. So I then did the master's degree in real estate in order to get that RICS accreditation. Once you've got that, you then need to find a job. So you'll start off as a graduate surveyor, and typically graduate surveyors will work within different departments of the business. So they can see, do I want to work in valuations? Do I want to work on professional advisory? Do I want to work on agency? So they'll have the chance to explore different areas of business. And then as they're doing this, they'll be building up, we call it an APC diary. So the APC is an assessment of professional competence, and your diary is something you fill in as you're going. So you have to do this over 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, you can do your APC, the assessment of professional competence. And that consists of an interview and a presentation. And within that interview, the assessors will decide, does this person demonstrate the professional and ethical standards in order to become a chartered surveyor? So if you do, fantastic, that's great, you've passed and you can call yourself a chartered surveyor. The other route, and this is something that's open to people who don't perhaps have the professional experience, don't have the accredited degree, is the professional experience route. So this would allow someone who's accumulated a certain number of years of professional experience the chance to go straight through to the interview process. So a panel can then decide whether they have enough experience to date, whether they've got the qualities required. So there's different routes. So not having an RSS degree is not necessarily the end of it. But for younger people coming into the industry, it's the quickest and the easiest way to become chartered.
That actually sounds like a lot of work. I think just when you say out loud, it's like, wow, I'm just really happy that I didn't have to go through that path, because I know it's technical. I'm not something that like you can just read some books and just know how it works. And it does require a lot of like meticulous like experience and study and to be really good at one. So, it's something that like, is a very, I wouldn't say rough. It's more like, it's an interesting pathway, I would say, in the real estate sector. So it's kind of cool. So like obviously this show, I'm sure you're aware, is for investors or people who understand real estate, learn more about investing overseas or locally, and what's the best way of the whole process. So there's something that I want to know your point of view on, is that what are some potential risk for real estate investors when they neglect engaging with the proper surveyors, because just now, I think one of the questions we mentioned before is that you don't really, in some process, you don't have to have one, but then it'd be very important to be as advisors or having along in the team to help you out. So I would like to have your opinion on that.
Yeah, sure. So for me, investment or good investment is about de-risking yourself as much as possible. Typically, for less risky investments, so putting your money in a high interest yielding account, that's a fairly low risk investment. So your level of return is going to be pretty low as well. We're talking maybe 1%, possibly. With real estate, you can typically get a yields in Hong Kong are very low, but still you'd be looking at the moment to get a yield of around between 2.5 through to 10+%. Now, the higher the yield, the higher the level of risk is. But if you want to try and really understand that investment, I would say the best thing to do is to bring on board a professional advisor. So this should be someone who's familiar with the local market, who's familiar with the property type, and who can give you a thorough appraisal of that particular investment. So for instance, it may be, we have a client, a hypothetical situation, we have a client who's looking to acquire a property in Thailand. Now they may look at the property and think, this is great, it's offering us 9.5% yield every year. It looks like it's let to some good tenants, it's a nice new building, what is there to go wrong? Well, actually there's quite a lot that can go wrong. A surveyor at the initial stage, they get to look at that property for you and look at what's happening in the area around the property. For instance, it may be that there's some serious infrastructure works going on that will affect accessibility to that property over the next couple of years. If you look at the tenant profile, they may have that market knowledge to be able to advise you and say, hey, your anchor tenant has been in the market for the past 6 months looking for a new property. Now that's information that you wouldn't normally have unless you start to speak to a professional. Now, if you speak to a general estate agent, they may tell you things like this in order to try and persuade you to either buy the property or not to buy it. If you're engaging a surveyor and you're engaging a professional, you should be able to rely on that information much more. As you know, the surveyor doesn't have a hidden agenda. They make it very clear to you at the start if they've got a conflict of interest or not. If they have, they shouldn't be acting for you, but normally they won't if they're acting for you. So you can be confident that they're giving you unbiased and independent advice. So that can help you formulate the strategy for acquiring the property. So you may look at it now and say, okay, 40% of the property could be vacant within the next 18 months. What's going on in the market? And the surveyor would be able to work with them and say, well, actually, inquiries have dropped down by 20% over the past 6 months. We're seeing rents fallen. They've fallen over the past 2 quarters by around 5% Q on Q, and our projection is they'll continue to fall as well over the next couple of quarters. So you can start to build up much more of a detailed method statement for going ahead with the investment or not. And that enables you to do a proper appraisal. And it may be that once you build in the void periods, once you build in the rental decline, once you build in all the other factors, once you've come up with a final figure, the surveyor might say, well, actually, you're looking at this property for 10 million baht, but actually we only consider the property is worth 7 million baht, particularly if you want to achieve your 8-9% yield. So it's helping you come up with it's helping you to de-risk the investment. There's other roles that a surveyor could fulfill as well. So you may be that you employ a building surveyor alongside your commercial surveyor, and the building surveyor might say, well, I've had a look at the construction, and there's a couple of hazardous materials within the building, or there's a couple of inherent defects within the building. And whilst it may not be an issue at the moment, over the next 5 to 10 years, this may become much more of an issue and may require a significant level of capital expenditure to resolve. So it's looking longer term as well and looking at what your costs are going to be over that period. So you can see initially, an investor may look at the investment and think this is fantastic, but then if they drill down a little bit more, they may start to see some of the issues, some of the hidden costs, and some of the things they're going to have to overcome over the next few years. So for me, it's about giving the investor all the information they need in order to make as clear and as transparent a decision as possible. And that's really the value of a surveyor. And I've seen so many instances where people have gone to buy property and haven't been properly informed about the property, haven't taken the right advice, and it's come back to hurt them further down the line. They're not making as much money as they could have done, or they're ending up losing money.
Sure. I think something that people, it's like, you should floss every day. People know that, they keep forgetting it. So obviously, hopefully this type of video will help people to remind them that, hey, maybe you should consider engaging with one or having someone in your team to have a better decision making. And then, so I'll switch back to something you're more familiar with, the commercial setting, right? What kind of role can surveyors do to impact with the investment?
So there's obviously the initial work they'll do before you're looking to buy the property, which we just covered, and then there's the ongoing management of the property as well. So a surveyor or surveying firm, because you'll be using different arms of or different types of surveyors to do this work, will be able to manage the property for you. They'll be able to find new tenants for you. They'll be able to give you advice on what's happening elsewhere in the market. For instance, have similar buildings sold recently? Are you seeing certain tenants looking to move around? What's going on in the market? So it will help you to really understand what's going on and really give you that information you need to make detailed decisions. So when it comes to board meetings, you've got very clear, very concise details of exactly what's happening, so you can make the best possible decisions. I think one of the roles of surveyors that's often blurred with an estate agent is on the agency side of things. Using a surveyor for the agency is very different to using an estate agent. First of all, I've talked about the additional professional and ethical requirements that a surveyor has. They can't act for you, or they can't do work if there's a conflict of interest. So everything they're doing for you is going to be in your absolute best interests. And the advice they're giving you is not to make you make a decision. It's not for them to make a quick dollar from you. It's for you to make the best possible decisions. And I think really for me, that is the fundamental quality of a surveyor, and the reason why people should continue to engage with surveyors is that level of trust and that level of transparency.
I see. You know, like obviously throughout the question so far, you kind of list out a couple kind of ways that surveyors can help. Would you mind, like, because obviously like a lot of people might need some better explanation of like how to walk through and everything. Would you mind to do a walkthrough, 1 or 2 scenarios on how and why people should need to engage in a surveyor? And let's say a fund or, you know, someone who's like a family office or something like that.
Okay, so I guess one example could be there's a fund who have several commercial office buildings. They are looking at what they should do with those properties. Should they hold on to them? Should they sell them? If they sell them, should they sell 1 or 2, or should they sell the whole thing? So I would say if you're ever in this position, the best thing you can do is speak to a surveyor straight away. The surveyor will be able to come in and provide that information for you. So the way that would work is initially, I'd say the best thing you could do at this stage is, or the initial step would be to get a full appraisal done of all the properties. So that should enable the fund to see, okay, these are our properties, this is what they would be worth if we were to sell them in the current market. So that enables you to look at what the potential returns are if you were to sell the property. The second stage, I would say, would be to undertake a full market appraisal, so to look at what's going on in the market, to look at what else is available. So the surveyor could work with them to say, well, if you sold these properties, you would potentially have a large amount of capital that you'd be looking to redeploy. Now you could look to redeploy that in the local market, and we've identified a couple of opportunities for you, and they'll be given a list of properties and details on the potential return, details on what we consider the risks of those particular investments are, how we see that property evolving over time. So do we see it possibly being under the threat of a higher level of vacancy? Do we see new buildings being built around it that could perhaps act as competition? So that should then enable the fund to see, well, okay, well, if we do sell, this is what we could buy instead. And that could be extended not just to the local market, but also to a more international scale as well. So it may be that a fund asks us in Hong Kong to look at this for them, and we say, well, have you considered investment in Malaysia? And we could connect them with our experts in that part of the world, who would then be able to help them see what's available in that market as well. So it's about giving them, we're not telling them which decision to make, we're giving them the data, we're giving them the information they need in order to start making those decisions. Now, coming back to the valuation side of things, within the valuation report as well, we will typically give advice on what could be done within the property in order to help preserve its value or improve its value. So one of the things we might say is the current average lease term is fairly short. So if we sold the property and you can only say, well, the current level of income is guaranteed for the next 6 months, that immediately starts to ring alarm bells for investors. Whereas if we could say to them, if you extended that from say, at the moment the average lease term is 2 years, if we extend some of these key tenants or look to tie them into new leases and perhaps tie them down for a longer period, maybe up to 6 years, that could have this impact upon your overall value. It may even be that you could offer them a rental discount to get them to sign a longer lease, and that would still increase the value because it's increasing the level of security investors would have about the level of income. So it's helping them there to position the asset as well. So to say, if you did dispose of this asset, this is how you could make sure it's in the best possible position in the market to achieve the highest possible price. Then if you do say, right, that's it, we want to sell these 2 properties, then you could bring the surveyor back in again to help you sell the property. So that would be a case of producing a suitable marketing program, sending it to various parties who they may know are currently in the market, and helping the seller to achieve the best possible price for the property. Then once that's done, they could work with them again in terms of where do we move the money now? What do we sink this capital into? So it's about providing them with all the advice and guidance and making sure that they don't just, making sure that they've got all the information they need to make the decision first of all, and then making sure that any decision they do make, they've been given the advice to make sure they're positioning themselves in the best possible place, so they're achieving the best possible result they can. Now there's other roles that the surveyor could do as well in terms of looking at redevelopment, looking at what upcoming works are required. The redevelopment angle in Hong Kong is always an interesting one. A number of buildings could be redeveloped to achieve a higher sale price. And that may also be something the client hasn't initially considered, but it could be something we go to them and say, well, actually, your property's worth 2 billion Hong Kong dollars at the moment. However, you've got an opportunity to redevelop this asset, and there's a building that's recently been redeveloped just across the street, similar size, and that's now worth 4.5 billion Hong Kong dollars. So it may be they then work with them on the redevelopment of that asset so that they've got the best possible, they've maximised the value of that particular property.
Yeah, I think you did a great job of painting the whole picture, because now is, even though like I'm sure everyone will be like, now I understand like the differences, and then it sounds like you are like the investors like very close alliance to like how to make the asset better, investment better, and think better. And obviously the decision making is still on the investor's point of view, but you're there just to support them in every single journey. So just now paint like a very good picture of what you do and Chartered Surveyor does as a whole. How does the industry has evolved over the years? And then that we both understand that the property tech, like the power of it. What's your view on how technology can change the whole landscape of it?
Okay, so just I'll give a bit of a brief history in terms of our profession. So surveyors, actually, the first use of the term surveyor was actually found in ancient Egypt. So surveyors worked back in Egyptian times. They helped to map the land when the Nile would flood each year, and then when the floodwaters receded, they helped to map who or which particular farmer would have which particular parcel of land. So that's how surveying started. And then even probably up till 200 years ago, that was still the main role of surveyors. It was about mapping land, and it was about registering ownership. Now, when the Industrial Revolution happened and you saw more commercial buildings, so up until that point you had shops, sure, but typically a shop was the ground floor of someone's house. You didn't really have factory buildings, you'd have farms but no factories, and the concept of an office was still fairly abstract at that point. So when the Industrial Revolution happened, you started seeing much more in the way of development of commercial buildings. And then surveying evolved as well to meet the needs of the owners of these buildings. So at first, factories, offices, they would be developed by whoever it was who would one day occupy the building. But then they started realizing, okay, actually, we want to move to a larger factory, but I would like to hold on to this one and try and find a new tenant. And that's where surveying really started to change and become much more transactional, much more advisory in that regard as well. And that was really the birth of commercial surveying. Now, as an industry, surveying has been fairly slow to adapt to technological changes. My former boss used to take great pleasure in telling me about how the standard day would start. They'd all sit around in the mail room for 2 hours opening letters. And a number of my former colleagues, particularly the older ones, they would still, most of the work they did was pen and paper. They still liked to use tape measures, measuring rods. They hadn't moved on to perhaps some of the more, I say recent developments, but actually the likes of laser measures, computer-aided design. That's been around for a long time, but still there's been a reluctance, particularly among our older surveyors, to properly embrace that. And we still see it today. I'd say, in terms of the use of technology, surveying is behind many of our sort of other sectors. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the reasons for this are. And I have to say as well, in Hong Kong, it seems to be a particular problem. So I'd say Hong Kong perhaps hasn't fully embraced all the changes in the same way as some of the other parts of the world have. But going forward, I think technology has huge potential to severely disrupt our industry. So we've been looking at this a lot lately. So for appraisal, one of the things you're going to start seeing a lot more of, and you've started to see in other parts of the world, is automated valuation models. So these essentially what you would do, you'll see it on a lot of websites. You can get free ones done. You just put in your property address and details, and it gives you a rough value. Well, the automated valuation model has taken that a couple of steps further. So again, you give all the details about your property, and then within, say, 10 minutes, it can give you a fairly accurate valuation. So I've seen reports saying that they've managed to get the automated valuation models to within 95% accuracy. I'm not disputing that, and I think that certainly will start to happen more. But that technology is still catching up. It's still trying to fully incorporate all the subtleties that perhaps you need in order to appraise the value of a property. But that's going to severely change the way we value properties. And for investors, instead of bringing on board a firm of surveyors to do the valuation for them in say 2 weeks, if they could get a figure within 10 minutes and minimizing all these human errors, and that's got to be a major attraction. The other side of it is with agency. So we've seen the rise of virtual agents. So at the moment, these don't take on any physical form. It's entirely based online. But I've seen some places where you go out and you have the virtual agent on your phone, and you can say, oh, hey, what did this property sell for next door? And the virtual agent will be equipped with all the transaction information that's available, everything that you're able to build into their database, and they can say, oh, this property sold last year for this price. Now, normally if you go and look around the property, whoever's showing you around should be able to tell you roughly what properties have sold for next door. But to have this service, to have someone who's got all that information on hand, every single transaction you've got records of, that's incredibly valuable. And these electronic agents, they're available 24/7. They have a 100% callback record. So really that's going to change massively how we buy and sell property. Now, does that mean the end of people like me, human surveyors? No, absolutely not, or I certainly hope not. I think there's still real estate is very much relationship driven still, and I think always will be. So I think these technological changes will help to complement the industry, and they will help to improve our standards as well. They'll help us to minimize some of our errors. They'll help us to become more efficient. But as far as valuation goes, yes, a large part of valuation is scientific, but also valuation is still very much an art as well. And I'm not sure a computer model will ever be able to fully capture that. They might do, but my thoughts are that they won't. So I think there will always be a role for the human surveyors, but certainly technology has enormous potential to change the industry as we know it.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are a lot of similar products to facilitate a surveyor, right? Like AVM, for example. Like, I remember when I heard about it, I was like, this too good to be true. But a lot of people in the industry would think that, hey, some market you can do AVM, not all of them, and not all the asset class. You know, if commercial, there's not that much comparable beside it. Residential is easier, but even rezone or a new development is still gonna be very different. And same time, like, there's drone and everything. So, but I believe is that, like, surveyor is kind of like, I think it's kind of, there's so many neurons that you can't just have a computer and say, hey, this is the best outcome. I believe there are more neurons that sometimes is not part of that, which it comes to something that, like, because, you know, our mutual friend Gary has started called Real Inflow, and I saw you have a guest post on it about the global measuring standard, and then, sorry about that, International Property Management Standards, sorry about that. And then would you mind explaining to the audience what that's about? Because I'm very new to it, and then it seems like a very big topic in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'll just touch briefly on what you just said as well about AVM would work better in certain markets. In Hong Kong, we're very lucky. The market's very transparent. There's a lot of comparable information around. Same in other markets, Australia, the United Kingdom as well. Very transparent markets. In some of the less transparent markets, like the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Burma, it's much harder to find any comparable information at all. And even if you did, you can't be that confident with it. You should never take comparable information that you can find for those sorts of markets and rely upon it. So that's where it has potential. It has potential, but there's still a lot of issues. Then leading on to your next question about the International Property Measurement Standards, I'll refer to it as IPMS for short, less of a mouthful. But that really is about transparency again, and the information that's available in the market. So before globalization, I'd say it didn't matter as much. Different markets would have certain measurement standards and ways of measuring buildings that they used, and it was fine because normally you didn't need to know about other countries, other markets in as much detail as you do today. The issue we have now is if you're in charge of the real estate director for a large multinational company, you're in charge of properties located all across the world. And if you're comparing a property, typically one of the first things you'll look at with real estate is how big is it? How many square foot is it? How much is it worth per square foot? What can I rent it for per square foot? Even down to what are the running costs? And typically running costs will be expressed. You might say it's $30 a square meter to run this particular building. Everything is brought back to size. How much space you need, it comes down to square foot again. But one of the issues we found, and this was discovered probably relatively recently, it was only around 10, 15 years ago, but they took the same office building, exactly the same floor plate, and they had various professionals from across the world try to measure the building and say how big that building was. And what they found is there was a 25% difference in quoted areas between these professionals, which is enormous. It's really enormous. And how can you make a decision about real estate and about property if you don't even have the most basic of information available to enable you to do that? And what we were finding in the market is someone would come to us and they'd say, okay, we have 100 people, and in the UK we occupy one person per 100 square foot, so this is how much space we need. But then when you come down to looking for space, it may be that the UK is measured 25% larger than the market you're looking at, so you may end up actually taking a space which is 25% too small. And we've seen that become an issue, and you see it's costly for businesses because they can't fit all their staff into the office from the start, and then they end up having to move on. So they've spent all the money going into the office, and then they can only be there for one lease term before they have to move on and find a larger building. So to help them with their decision making and to make it an even playing field, the idea of having a truly global measuring standard was introduced, and it was introduced, or it began life solely with offices from January 2016. So we haven't seen huge uptake so far, but it's certainly something, if you speak to a chartered surveyor, it's something they will be very familiar with, and a chartered surveyor should be able to give you the area of a building with using the IPMS, so they should be able to look at both your buildings in different countries and give you a consistent measuring standard that you can then use to make your decisions from. Now, one of the reasons I think this is important for Hong Kong as well is when it comes to finding office space in Hong Kong, you can very quickly become confused about what basis of measurement the landlord is using. You'll see some landlords stating this office is 10,000 square foot gross, this is 10,000 square foot lettable, this is 10,000 square foot, on whatever basis of measurement they want to use. This is fairly unique to Hong Kong. In most other markets, all the landlords will use the same basis of measurement. They may not necessarily use IPMS, but they will use the same basis of measurement. But in Hong Kong, it can be very difficult to compare certain buildings because they've been measured in a different way, and this trips up a lot of occupiers here as well, because they might say, well, we looked at 10,000 square foot in this building, so it's got to be the same in this building. No, it all depends on what basis of measurement they've used. And you may think, because you're given the rent, they might say this is 120 Hong Kong dollars a square foot, this building is $100 per square foot. You might think, oh great, this one's the cheaper building, but actually it might not be. You may be paying more for the space you're actually physically able to use because of the basis of measurement they've used. So really, IPMS is about improving transparency, letting occupiers and letting decision makers see exactly how much space they actually have within a building. So it's a very important step.
I see. So like, it sounds like a very important things to do, right? So let's say if you have a big, a broadcast or a voice to the whole industry, right? How would you tell them about how the standard can impact the industry? And I want to ask you more about why do you think it's not implemented yet? Because it sounds like something that, a surveyor point of view, it sounds very logical. Even when I hear the whole description of it, it sounds very logical so far. But how come it hasn't been taken up so far?
Yes, I think the IPMS is an RICS initiative. So people who perhaps aren't RICS members initially at first would be like, oh, it doesn't apply to me, I don't need to use this. And even people who are RICS members as well, it can be very difficult at the moment still to implement it. And a lot of that comes down to education. So a lot of clients will say, we've always used this basis of measurement. It's going to be very difficult for us to explain to our investors why the area has suddenly changed, and you're now telling me the property is 10% smaller than we believed it was. So that's the difficulty, and I think that's one of the roles of surveyors is to help raise the awareness of this amongst our clients and to show them the benefits of it, to help them feel more comfortable perhaps with utilizing it. It's still fairly early days. As I said about technology, the real estate industry can be quite resistant to change. So I think it's something you're going to start seeing more of going forward. And although it may be a while until all the landlords are using this, it may never get to that stage where the landlords use this. But we should be at a position where if you've employed a chartered surveyor, they will be able to provide you the advice on this, and they'll be able to give you what the IPMS measurement is for the buildings you're looking at. They may need to measure it again themselves if the information is not available, but they should be able to give you that information to help you make your decisions.
I see. So, I think today you covered a lot of very important information about what a surveyor does, the future of it, what it can be done, and why is it important. What kind of takeaway do you want the audience to have, regardless they are maybe retail investors, family office? What kind of tips do you have for them to find the best surveyors or engage a surveyor to help their investments?
Okay, so first of all, you need to make sure you're engaging the right surveyor. Now, surveyors should be able to tell you straight away. For instance, if someone phoned me up and said, "Oh, hey, I'm looking for some advice. I'm looking to buy a shopping mall complex in Australia," I would be able to say straight away, "Look, I don't have the knowledge in order to assist you on that. However, I can refer you perhaps to a colleague who does have that knowledge." So you want to make sure you're using the right surveyor for the job. So surveyors should tell you this, but do look at their background, look at where they're based, look at their track record, look at what sort of projects they've been involved in the past, and make sure you're getting the best person to give you that advice. The other thing, and I think this is absolutely key, is have a chat with them. Explain what your desired outcome looks like. So the surveyor should be saying to you right from the beginning, okay, what is your current reality? What's the position you're currently in? And now what is your desired reality? How do you want this to look once we've gone through the project? And they should be able to give you some information there and then about how they will help you get from your current reality to your desired reality. But I think really it comes down to expertise. If you're not using a real expert, you're not going to be getting the full value for money. So you really need to make sure you're using the right person. And I think that can be difficult to find, but typically you want to find someone who's in the market you're working in, or has a track record within that market.
I see. I mean, that's what our Denzity kind of want to do too, because we thought that if we have a better assortment of different experts, for example, different type of surveyors, different experience, different expertise, then people will have spending less time sourcing to find the experts, and then there won't be miscommunications or misengagement with someone that cannot help you. So it's something that obviously to me it makes a lot of sense, but it's something that a lot of investors tend to make. So I want to say thank you for to this episode, for your time. It's very informative. And for the audience who might want to find you, talk to you more about your services, how would you suggest them to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. So you can search for Tom Parker MRICS or Tom Parker Colliers, and you should be able to find me that way. Similarly, you could email me. Always very responsive to emails and happy to speak to people, even if they've just got a question about how they get into the industry as well. So my email is tom.parker@colliers.com. And they're probably the two main methods to reach out and find me. I do produce a fair amount of media for other sources, but not on social media at the moment myself.
Yeah, okay.
Again, comes back to surveyors and technology.
I'll include everything in the show notes, and I'll say thank you for your time. It's a pleasure, and I hope that the second episode they can join us in again about maybe I'll get Gary together, talk about the future of surveying, different type of way of looking at it. So thanks for your time again. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Darren. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good day.
Bye. And you. Bye.
Thanks for watching. What do you think of this episode? Please let us know in the comment below, and be sure to hit the subscribe button to keep in touch with us for upcoming videos. But before we go, I want to give a big shout out to Patina Design Lab. They're the one who help us in making our brand, our direction, as well as these videos. They are a strategic design consultancy firm to help businesses with a wide range of design services, from industrial design, branding, graphic design, art direction, content creation, and many more. They are a very talented bunch, and I urge you to check out their website for their work. That's all for today, and see you next time. Cheers.